Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. Before we kick off this week's episode, just a quick ask. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to make sure that you never miss an episode, never miss out on any of the strategies and tactics that we're sharing to help you continue charting your own path to freedom. And if you'd like to go deeper with any of this, we've launched a free Facebook group, which you can join at pathtofreedom.com/group. And we've linked that in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. All right. Thank you again for being here. Let's drop in to the episode. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Path to Freedom podcast. Today, I'm joined by Bobby Brennan. And you see, if you're watching this, you see Bobby smiling. We were talking before we started recording. He's fresh off a Disney trip with his just turned 3-year-old son. So the fact that he's actually sitting up and smiling is a feat in itself. Because if you've ever taken your young kids to Disney, you know that it's a lot of fun, but also exhausting and takes a toll on you. So anyways, Bobby, thanks for being here, man.
I survived Disney. No, thanks for having me, Wes. I always love conversations with you and kind of sharing some of the experience that we've had in the business and in the franchise category together.
Yeah, man. It goes back a little ways, I guess, at this point, at least 6 or 7 years, probably. I was working for Shelf Genie, and you, I guess, were with Franchise Fastlane at the time, and we just started seeing each other at all these conferences that we were going to throughout the years. And now we're both kind of in different places, but still get to see each other in person at some conferences, and our paths cross. But you're someone I've always had a lot of respect for, in franchising in general. And, I think you kind of bring an interesting perspective that I really like to pick your brain on today, for the purpose of this show, which is really, how someone that's a prospective franchise owner, right, or someone that is considering franchise ownership and going through the research process with, in most cases, for most people, multiple brands, right? They're evaluating multiple opportunities. What are some of the do's and don'ts? Because this is something that's, I guess, counterintuitive to a lot of people, because I try to do a lot of coaching around this. The fact that the really good franchise companies out there are not going to sell a franchise to just anyone, right? And they're going to have this very structured due diligence process that someone can work through. And they understand that, before I buy a franchise, I've got questions, I've got information I need to gather, but so does the franchisor. They've got questions about you. They've got information they want to gather about you. They need to get to a point where they feel confident that you're a good fit for their brand and what they're looking for. And people mess this up far more often than they should. And so I'll let you first, maybe just kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background of like how you got into franchising. So I should probably say you're a partner with Front Street Equity now, right? Which I had Eric Van Horn on the podcast not too long ago. So he kind of gave us a good overview of what you guys are doing at Front Street. I mentioned Franchise Fastlane. So give us kind of the quick version, like how did you get into franchising and what are the kind of the things that led to where you are now with Front Street?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Wes, and the opportunity just to share, my experience. But so I got into franchising in 2008. Dumb luck. I was graduating college, and the economy was tanking, and all of a sudden, my business degree didn't look nearly as sexy as I thought it did in 2007. Right?
I was a year behind you on that. I can remember.
Yeah. And you're just like, what the heck am I going to do? And it was dumb luck. I was actually, for those that age up, I was the Al Bundy. I was selling shoes. I was a shoe salesman in college. I had to sling leather and suede to get paid, but it was a 100% commission job. And I was making like 30, 40 grand. This is almost 15 years ago in college, working part-time, just selling shoes and just.
That's legit.
Right. I loved it. I'm making great money. I blew it all at the bars at college. Right. But
sure.
They opened up a franchise across the way at the mall, and it was in health and wellness and fitness. And it was a brand called Complete Nutrition.
Yeah.
And they opened it up, and I'd go over there and talk to them, and they're trying to sell me all these supplements and stuff. And I liked working out. It was right down my alley. And
sure.
I asked them what they paid, and I'm like, oh, there's no way I'll come work for you guys, but I really like the category. And they're like, well, what if you just were like an outside salesperson? I'm like, what's that mean? So anyway, long story short, I started doing outside sales. Like I would sell shoes to someone, take my break, walk over to the supplement store, sell them supplements because I'd ask them their goals. And they're like, hey, you could probably manage one of these. Like, what are you going to do after you graduate? And it was going to be enterprise, rent a car. I was going to work for their like management.
Hey man, that's what I did. 2009, I pulled a Will Ferrell and I went to Enterprise Rent a Car.
Yeah, you're washing cars. You're kind of running a branch, kind of almost like a franchise in a lot of cases.
In a lot of ways, if you get to a certain point, but starting out, you're a grunt and you're washing a lot of cars and getting yelled at by a lot of customers that are mad that they drive a full-size SUV and their insurance policy covers a compact car, and you got to help them rationalize that.
It's not your fault, but it's your problem, right? And that's
right.
For the people that are, a lot of times when you're a franchisee, that goes along the same saying. It's not your fault, but it's your problem a lot of times.
Yeah, well put.
So I worked for them. I was graduating. My lease was up. I was going to move back to St. Louis, where I'm originally from. And they're like, hey, we're expanding. We're going to buy the Kansas City market, the franchise owners that own that location. We're going to expand. We'd love for you to move out there and run it. I'm like, I don't know anything about running a business. I've never managed. I've never hired people. Like, you want me to go out there and run this business for you? They're like, yeah, we're going to open up, 5 or 10 locations. And they were the first or second franchisee. So I think we were like store number 6. Right? Some corporate stores. Yeah. So I, just jumped on it, moved out to Kansas City, did not know anyone. We didn't have signs on the building. I was helping to negotiate leases as a 23-year-old, just fish out of water. Like,
you own a house? No, but I'm going to negotiate this commercial lease.
Well, they're like, Bobby, go check out this space. Do you think it's good? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, just didn't know any better. And to this day, the franchisee I worked with in that system, I remember calling them. I was so frustrated. I was upset. I was making crap money. And I said, listen, like, hey, like, this isn't working. And he goes, Bobby, do you ever want to own your own business? That's why you joined this, is the opportunity to potentially own your own or be a partner. I said, well, yeah, that's what I want. He goes, FIO. I'm like, what's that? He goes, figure it out. He goes, the higher you go up, when you become the business owner, the CEO, et cetera, if you can't figure it out, no one's going to do it for you. Yeah. And I think that served me really well in other areas, even in franchising when you have resources, but you got to have a figure it out mentality. And that really stuck with me. So we kind of figured it out. We scaled that to a couple locations. We got really ingrained in the community. It was a community-driven business. So, I mean, everyone knew GNC. We were 5X the cost, and nobody knew who we were. So I was at the gym in the morning. I'd go and work in the store. I'd go to the gym at 4 or 5 o'clock. I'd bring customers back with me every day. I would literally be at a concert, and people would be like, supplement guy. I mean, I could have ran for mayor.
Yo, you got some of that creatine or what?
They're like, yeah, this guy's my drug dealer, healthy drugs, right? But I was like, I knew everybody at every gym. I knew every trainer because that's what our market was. But I just didn't know any better because I didn't know anyone. So that was my focus, was really just getting ingrained in the community and using the franchise as an opportunity. Yeah. So scale that up. We got to 5 or 10 locations. We started acquiring other franchisees as the brand was growing. And I mean, I was in the stores, people would want to talk to me. Eventually I became a partner in that, and they'd want to talk to me as a franchisee and said, how's this 26-year-old kid at the time? How are you guys running a $1.3 million store and you've never managed people? This is your first job. And so everyone thought it was easy. Everyone joined and like, oh, well, if this idiot kid can do it with no experience, imagine what I can do with my background. But they didn't see what I was doing behind the scenes. They saw the numbers in the FDD. They heard me validate, but they didn't listen to me when I said, here's what it took to get there. But we scaled that group I was a part of to 50, 60 plus locations. And then I saw e-commerce was going to come and eat us alive. We just were not ready for that. So I had an opportunity to exit. I was a very small partner in that, but got some nice comp from it and payout. And I exited. And common fallacy a lot of people do is I'm like, the franchisor didn't do anything for me. So, right. And then I left and tried to start something on my own and realized very quickly, the best analogy was, it was like when I moved out of my parents' house to go to college. All of a sudden, I didn't have the franchisor that was cooking and cleaning and doing the dishes, and, vetting vendors and all those things, marketing and content. And I wasted a lot of money trying to start my own e-commerce business. And just because I'm stubborn, I kept that, and we still have that going today, and it's grown, but it took me 5-6 years to make a dime. That is not a good ROI for you people looking at a franchise. That is not a good ROI.
It's not the quickest path, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I like the analogy of, moving out of your parents' house. That's I think a really good analogy for this. And a lot of people can make their own thing work through sheer effort and brunt force, but it's going to take more time. Like, I mean, I tell people all the time, like, for my wife and I, like, the franchises that we owned and have owned, like, and one we weren't even that successful in, but we were able to sell it. We got, in a 3-year period, we got so much further along than we would have been able to if we were just doing something on our own. Like, it gives you the ability to run faster. And I think that's important. It's not always a matter of, oh, you can't figure this out if you do it on. A lot of people can, but time's valuable, So what are you giving up if you're, making that decision to go spend 2-3 years really building something to get to a point where there's any substantial revenue or income coming from it?
You can, I mean, right. Can you do it cheaper? You always can. The franchise is usually not always the cheapest option. Maybe it's going to save you a lot in mistakes. And I saw that we made expensive mistakes in the e-commerce business. And that kind of pushed me back to franchising. And the founder of the franchise I was a part of had reached out. He eventually had sold, was starting Franchise Fastlane. And we kind of went back and forth and explained that, hey, we're helping recruit franchisees for franchisors because they might be good at operations, but they're typically not good at sales. And sales and ops are just two very different things, and really helping to have an organized process and also vet the candidates better. One of the biggest issues I saw with the brand I was a part of, like I said, they had what we call the open halls versus the high walls. Like, they let everybody in, right? So like, we wanted to put barriers of, hey, are they going to follow a process? Are they going to, let's look at, just because they have the money and an impressive resume doesn't mean they're going to be a great business owner. And I think for the people that are thinking about, okay, well, you're going to have to do some soul searching. And I've got some great friends and family, I know you probably do too, that I'm like, never buy a franchise. I love you, but don't buy a franchise because you don't have the stomach for it. Or, hey, you know what? It seems scary, but you've got to take the leap, or you got to be willing to pick up the phone on a 7:00 on a Saturday night, depending on the type of business you own. That's going to happen. And I know too many friends that love to golf 4 days a week. And they're like, well, I don't want to work on the nights or weekends. I like my vacations and PTO. And it's just a switch. It's the most rewarding, in my opinion, type of business that you can own. And because I'm not a visionary, I learned that. And most people, in my opinion, are not visionaries. Sure. But I know I'm a playbook guy. Give me the playbook. I'll call audibles, but give me the playbook and the framework, and I'll run fast. And I'm competitive, so I like having a peer network in franchising. That's really helpful. But I think people have to look like, what are their strong suits? If you want to get into a franchise and you've never managed people before, like, if I'm a franchisor, that's a red flag. Okay, you've never managed people. Help me understand how you're going to overcome that. So just take inventory of where your skill set is. Is it immediately starting point? Even if they're working with a professional, which I encourage everybody to work with a consultant like yourself, because it just provides so much value, and you can help them ask them those tough questions to themselves. Because a lot of people get excited. Oh, I can do it. My question to them is how? How can you do it? How are you going to do it?
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the episode, but I wanted to quickly share a free resource with you. If you're curious about franchise ownership and want to learn more about how countless people, including myself, have leveraged franchising as a way to create more freedom for themselves and to take control of their livelihood, I've put together an ebook. It's called Franchise Wealth Creation, and it's the perfect starting point for anyone that's just curious to learn more about this whole franchise thing and how I've helped hundreds of other people navigate all the steps involved in understanding and researching franchising. So click the link in the show notes, fill out a short form. I'll send you the ebook. I think it's a great starting point if you're curious at all about learning more about franchising. All right, let's get back to the episode. It takes some of that FIO, right? That you referred to earlier. Like, I think realistic expectations is a big issue with people getting into franchises and then not being as successful as they would like to be. In your example of when, you were running these complete nutrition locations and people are seeing your numbers in the FDD and they're hearing you validate, but they're not really hearing what you're saying in terms of all this work and all the grind that you were doing behind the scenes and after hours to get it done. Like in our Shelf Genie franchise, that's my wife too, right? Like she's always thought outside of the box. We spend the money on marketing and lead gen, and that helps, but we haven't settled for that. And we get a lot of business from just being well networked and having good strategic partnerships. And it took years, of her doing that before it got to the point where it was consistently bringing in more revenue. And it's the same thing, right? The other franchisees, the people that validate, they all want to hear what Kelly's doing differently, right? But most of them don't really listen or don't really put into action what she's telling them that she's doing. They want an easy button, right? They want her to send them a document that she's put together that's, led to this
steps 1 through 10 to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's always going to be some level of that FIO in a franchise. And I think that's where there's sometimes not realistic expectations too. I think sometimes people are under the impression they're buying a done for you business when that's not the case. You're getting a framework and systems and support, a playbook, like you put it, but it doesn't matter, how good any of that is if you don't take it and run with it.
Yeah.
You can't solve for that unless you just do the work.
Amen. And really, I think so many people think the franchise is, a business in a box. And there's buzzwords out there of, hey, it's this type of franchise model versus that type. And ultimately, it depends on you as an owner. Like I saw people with way more money and way more experience that should have been more successful than me. But to your point, they weren't seeing and hearing, what am I doing to be successful? Like how hard? And the question I like to ask is, are you willing to do whatever it takes to be successful?
Yeah. Including figure it out, right?
Including figure it out. The franchisor, like there's going to be bumps and bruises, whether you're joining a 5,000 unit franchise or a 5-unit franchise. There's going to be growing pains and pros and cons to both sides. So knowing that, like, hey, taking inventory of what you're doing, and kind of to your original question, this is a very long-winded response, but like when I left the group I was with, it was because we only kind of did the franchise recruitment, and I saw opportunities on, can we help these franchisors from an advisory, from a business strategy, from a recruiting standpoint? So at Front Street, that's really, we have a couple pillars, but it's strategic advisory, franchise development, sales, and that's kind of what I run. So I talk to candidates like a lot of your clients are all day. So I want to make sure they know how to set yourself up for success, because it is a two-way interview. But then we have executive recruiting, and we partner with unique emerging brands that we see enterprise value and that we can help compress the learning curve. We tell our brands as well as our franchise candidates, we're not going to get rid of the learning curve. It's still there. But how can we give you exponential growth and grow through those faster, and maybe skip a couple of those, right, that you're normally going to have? Sure. How do we skip a couple of those learning curves or those expensive or hard lessons? And that's ultimately what our goal is. And, a good consultant like Wes here, he's going to help you kind of anticipate those two and know, listen, like you said earlier, nobody gets into a franchise, any business, let alone a franchise, for your first year. Like no one does. Like your first years survive, right?
Yep.
And then your second and third and fourth, it doesn't get any easier. You get better at doing it. You get better understanding what it takes to be successful.
That's a really good way of putting it. It doesn't get easier, you get better. And I totally agree with that, because in some ways it gets more challenging, right? As you scale, like the more employees or people you have on your team, the more clients you have, right? The more moving parts and pieces, like from an operational standpoint, it gets more challenging. Like much easier when you've got one job on the books this week compared to 15 jobs on the books this week, So that's a really valid point. And, so there's so much I want to dive into that I think you're going to be a really good resource on. But, so let's talk a little bit more about the franchise discovery process, right? I know it's rude to ask someone their number, but you've awarded a lot of franchises over the years, right? And you don't have to tell us your number if you don't want to, but it's been a lot. And, so you kind of seen it all at this point. I'm sure things that franchisors could have done better or had structured in their process a little bit better, things that candidates could have done better in terms of how they conducted themselves throughout the process. So maybe as a starting point for that kind of conversation, and you don't have to get too into the weeds with this, but maybe kind of lay out, like from your experience, what should the ideal steps in that discovery process look like for someone that's investigating a franchise brand?
No, I think it's a great question, and it's a two-way interview, and I know you share that with all your clients, and most franchise consultants and partners do that really well. Hey, this is a two-way interview, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at them, so I mean, think interview is if you've ever interviewed for a job, all your listeners probably have at some point.
Yeah.
Is you're showing up on time, you're showing up prepared. Is there any pre-work and homework? Like you're being respectful of each other's time. Doesn't mean you don't ask questions.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're bought in. Doesn't mean anything other than being respectful. Like I always frame it up for people. I'm like, look, this is a prospective business partner that you're talking to, right? So treat it accordingly. Right. If you're talking to any other sort of individual or organization you're considering partnering with in business, like put your best foot forward, be genuine, be yourself, right? Don't be something or someone that you're not, but I like be respectful of each other's times. That's a really good way to frame that.
Again, if you think of an interview, like I like asking tough questions in interviews, right? To see how someone can respond and vice versa. I think you should ask what you feel are the tough questions and come prepared with those. If they're having you watch a video or jump online, just do some of the basics, like show that you've done like an interview. Don't show up not knowing anything about the company.
Yeah.
Even if it's a little bit, do some research. And, it doesn't mean you're never going to like have to reschedule a call or something, but don't be the person that no shows. Cause if I'm a franchisor, that's strike one. That's a yellow flag already that, hey, this person either they don't get technology, right? Which most of our brands use a lot of technology. Yeah. Or they're not a good communicator, or they can't manage their schedule. So
they
someone
don't care.
misses 2 or 3 calls, or they don't care.
Yeah.
And the one thing I share, and we were talking about this the other day at one of our brands confirmation days, was you've got interest, but do you have commitment? You need both. You need interest and commitment. You can be very interested in a franchise, and some of those people will still buy. I think that's a mistake for the franchisee and for the franchisor. I want to see commitment. And so we have a process that we're going to outline. So typically we're going to jump on the phone and we're going to say, hey, like, does the person have the net worth, liquidity, whatever? If you've been qualified and working with a partner like Wes, you've already done those things. They've already kind of shared, hey, this person meets the requirements. They've got the management or background that we're looking for. And then we get on an introductory call. In that introductory call, we send information about the brand beforehand. Some brands do it live, but I want them to digest that and let them see, did they do their homework?
Yep.
Did they come up with questions?
Yep.
And I really want to dive into who are they? What's their why?
Hey, everyone, we'll be right back to the episode, but one quick note, success doesn't happen in a vacuum. So if you'd like to learn more, you want to go deeper and interact with like-minded people, I'd love to have you join the free Path to Freedom Facebook group. You can join by going to pathtofreedom.com/group and become a part of the Path to Freedom community. All right, back to the episode. That's the key. I love it. If other brands are out there listening, I love it when they do send some good, not just fluff, right? And obviously, like if you send them a 20-minute webinar, it's not going to cover everything, right? But give them some good, substantial information. And that way they show up for the meeting with you and they're not being presented to for the entire time. You can have some actual conversation, right? And really start that process of getting to know each other. And like, you've done a lot more franchise sales and development than I have, but like different candidates are going to have questions in different areas of the business, right? So marketing may be really important or top of mind to one person, whereas training and support may be more important to the next person. So if you're giving them some of that information ahead of time, it's going to allow you and them to focus on the things that are more top of mind for them in the time that you actually have together live. So sorry to interject on that, but
no,
I
love
think it's
that.
a really good, way to structure that process.
And to your point, you're not giving away the farm. It's like some franchisors say, I don't like sending anything before because I'm worried that they're not going to get on the phone with me. I'm the gatekeeper. But again, if you do a good job and you're marketing it right, they're going to be coming to you, and just give them something to become educated on the brand. So like you said, you're not talking at them and presenting for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. I want to get to know them, and I want to understand things like, what's their why franchising? What's your strategy? And it's going to change, right? Are you planning on, are you Portfolio Pete? You're adding this to one of your other brands? Are you Side Hustle Sam? Like, these different types of names, but like, am I trying to do this in addition to it? And I'm going to look at that market, and this is something a lot of candidates don't think of, is I'm going to look at that in a market like an Atlanta or a Charlotte or something. I'm going to be much stricter than Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm just going to, because that is a prime market. So if you're in Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, like some of these tier 1 markets for franchising, like just know you better bring your A game for franchisors. If it's a good franchisor, because they want the best people, because some of those are the best possible markets.
Let's take a little sidebar there, because this is something else I see that like candidates don't understand until I kind of walk them through it, which is like, territory for a franchisor is like inventory, basically, right? So once they've sold a territory, it's gone. It's off the market. It's unavailable. And good franchisors do have to be smart and strategic about not only who they're awarding territory to in general, but some territories are going to be more valuable than others, just simply based on the amount of production they should be able to do. And, no offense to anyone out there, but, we're not playing for participation awards here. Like, you don't want to award an A+ territory to a C- player. Right. And there's a lot that goes into that, right? And there's not a perfect science for predicting who's going to be the A player and who's going to be the C player. We've all seen surprises go both ways, on that side of the 100%. Equation.
So
but
true.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get a little surprised when, whether it's how they're mapping out a market, right? And someone wants 2 territories that are not conjoining, or they don't understand why the franchisor is not crazy about selling them just 1 territory in the middle of this huge market that's still untapped. Like, there's a lot of strategy that good franchisors should really be looking at in terms of who they're awarding territory to and where they're awarding the territory.
Well, and to add to that, because I think you hit exact points, and I think it's a surprise to people when I say, no, we're not going to let you cherry pick these 3 territories and make the rest of the market unsellable. Like, that's the goal, and that's going to hurt you as a franchisee. You want more brand recognition. You want more marketing dollars being spent. But not only is it the person and the market, but then it's their strategy. Like, okay, someone might come to me and they're like, Bobby, we had a great example. I just got back from a brand's confirmation day. We had a group that everyone else was planning on being full-time in the business. And there's brands that, they called it executive model, semi-absentee, whatever you want to call it, semi-passive, or you have your traditional owner-operator model.
Yep.
And we strongly encourage people. First 6 months, I'm going to tell you, we strongly encourage, we don't require, but we strongly encourage you be involved in the business.
Yep.
For people coming through, like, I really want them to think about, all the different variables that we're looking for, just as much as they're looking for us as well too. So like, there's a lot of things that brands are looking for, but if someone tells me I'm going to keep my full-time job, the next question I'm going to ask is, tell me about how flexible your job is. If it's not flexible at all, that's a red flag. Like, I'm sorry, you want to run a business on the weekends, you're on Zoom 10 hours a day, or you're traveling. Like, help me understand how you're going to make that work when you lose a general manager.
That's the thing, right? And I've gotten way more firm with the people that I'm working with. And, a little bit of our story with the second franchise that we got into. Look, it wasn't a disaster by any means, but it wasn't, this wildly successful business for us either. Didn't have anything to do with the franchisor or the industry. It was, we wanted to do it in more of this executive ownership model, right? Had a GM coming right out of the gates, went to training with us. And, compared to a lot of people with like a W-2 job, like, I had more flexibility in my schedule. I should have been way more hands-on in that business for at least the 6 months, the first 6 months. And then we got to a situation where I've done a podcast on this where I really kind of, opened up and said, these are the things that we screwed up, along this little journey. So I won't go into too much of it right now, but we lost our manager 3 years in, and I was not like completely hands off in the beginning, but not as hands on as I should have been, and not as hands on as I should have been along the way. So then we get to this fork in the road where it's like, okay, what's plan B, right? And the immediate plan B was, well, Wes has to step in and take over the day-to-day of this 3-year, 7-figure business that's got a lot of moving parts and pieces, and
not
Wes
easy.
has not
Not
been
easy
flexing
industry.
that muscle, so steep learning curve for me. And then you have to decide, like, is this how I want to spend my time indefinitely? Do I want to hire another manager? And so I've just, through our own personal experience, I try to get really, really real with people that are considering getting into a franchise that way with a full-time manager from day one. What's plan B, right? Do you have the bandwidth or the interest to step in and take over the reins, at least for a period of time, till you can
Right.
replace that manager? And people need to
And that
really think about that.
Yeah, and that problem, it gets, as you scale, that kind of gets solved a lot of times with additional layers of management, but you
Sure.
can't get there without the revenue, without typically additional locations. And
Yeah.
I think that's another caveat. Like at Front Street today, most of our brands, the 3 brands we're with today, they're actually, we're talking to other brands that are more service based, but they're brick and mortar. And I've owned a very similar situation to you. I got into a service-based business that was blowing up, and it wasn't the brand. The brand's doing really well,
Right.
and it was my strategy. I over relied. It was more abdication. I wasn't delegating, and I knew how to do it myself. I put too much on the general manager,
Yeah.
and when it didn't work out, all of a sudden I'm sitting there saying, how do I run this business with my other businesses or my full-time job?
Yeah.
And that's a question. I mean, it's a real question everyone has to ask is, hey, like, no one's going to treat the business like you are. Right. And so we've even done things where, like, as a general manager, if I'm going to be semi-absentee or executive, I'm finding some way to do a profit share or a phantom equity or something with that GM. And I'm going to find someone that has industry experience.
Yeah.
But for me, it was also like, I realized, for me at least, brick and mortar employees, I like managing them. They're fun compared to some of the others, like the service-based industries. Again, they're both great. There's huge, amazing upsides in both. But no, like, if you've been a white collar employee your entire life, are you really cut out for managing a blue collar service-based business?
Yeah.
It's a different beast.
Yeah.
Versus,
And look, closely at the business too, right? Because like both of the franchises we've owned and the one we still own are more of that blue collar employee, right? But very different, right? Like in an insulation business, other than like one or two, experienced kind of technical people that could do the spray foam and stuff, it wasn't a very skilled position that we were hiring for. And so what we learned kind of the hard way is that in the trades, a lot of these guys just bounce around from trade to trade. They'll do insulation, they'll do painting, they'll do landscaping. Like they don't really care, and they're not looking, and obviously I'm speaking in generalities, but they're not looking past next Friday when they get paid, right? And they just want to hit a certain number of hours in the week to know that they're going to get paid a certain amount of money on Friday. So if they hit that on Thursday, they may not show up on Friday, right? And they know that, there's a good chance you won't fire them because you need people. And if you do fire them, they'll worry about that Monday. They'll go, to a temp agency or show up at a job site, and someone's going to hire them and pay them. And so very, very different than our Shelf Genie business, where it is a little more skilled, but it's more so like we pay them commission only, and it's more of like a partnership type of thing. So our salespeople can make great money, but they have to be good. Same thing with the installers, like totally different dynamic. But this is something I wanted to ask you about is your thoughts at this point on like are some franchise models better suited for executive ownership, right? And there's so many variables here. It's almost hard to like ask these types of questions in this setting, but I think what you were kind of starting to get at is how I've come to think of it too. That some of your maybe more traditional brick and mortar storefront type business models may be a better option if you really want to start something with a manager from day one.
Yeah, my experience, and again, limited. I've owned a couple franchises, but it was. There's a reason, in my opinion, the biggest franchise or ease in the world almost all exclusively own brick and mortar. Like from a scalability, for me, having the customer and having the employees in the same 4 walls is really important. Like you can control. It's a controlled experience.
That's the difference in my mind.
And and if you go on a job site, for example, we were in the restoration space, which tons of money, but
Yep.
it's a dirty job. Like you said, getting people, we pay way better than the average company. We still couldn't get people to show up,
Yeah.
or show up and have any level of customer service whatsoever.
Or give a shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I got like these trucks on the road. I've got equipment that's really expensive all over. And I couldn't tell you how many times we get customer complaints that you guys messed up my floor, or you guys did this, or you guys missed something, because it's someone's home. And so again, I think a home service business, I personally would be much more involved in the day-to-day starting out. A brick and mortar, it is important depending on the type of brand and what that looks like. I've seen that I didn't have to be nearly as involved. Always have someone else that's in the store that was like an assistant manager, or like they're next in line, that if my GM left, the business didn't shut down.
That's right.
And in the other business, my GM was estimator. He was doing all the insurance stuff. All the other guys were just laborers.
Yeah.
And they didn't get a chance to see him doing that because we weren't in the same place. He's off on job sites. The other guys are at other places. So for me, I think the brick and mortars tend to lend itself to a semi-absentee model.
Yeah.
There's other changes. They've got real estate. They typically have higher cost in a lot of instances. But again, I think you've got to find out how complicated this business. One of our like tenants at Front Street is we want simple. We want simple business models. There's no such thing as an easy franchise or easy business. If you find it, let me know. But we want simple, and is it scalable, right? It may not be simple, feel simple the first year or two, but is it simple from you don't have 50 different services or products or offerings. Like, it's something fairly simple and straightforward that the consumer can also understand fairly quickly. If it takes us 10 minutes to explain it to a consumer, it's too complicated. You need to be able to do that in 30 seconds.
Yeah, great point. I tell people all the time, I'm like, simple does not equal easy, right? But and like with our experience, like my wife and I have come to appreciate so many things with the Shelf Genie business that I think we took for granted until we had this experience building another business. And simplicity is a big part of that. And that's not a knock on the insulation business. Like, there's so much more upside in something like insulation or restoration than there is in custom pull-out shelving for kitchen cabinets and pantries, right? Like, that's pretty niche. But there's a lot of things, in my experience, there's a lot of benefits to having a business that's more simplistic, which again does not translate to easy. But going back to your comparison of like brick and mortar to service, and just like you said, there's so many variables that need to be looked at, and they both have pros and cons. So it's really more of an individual, and that's why I do the type of work that I do up front with people before we start talking about brands. I think the other difference is, and you kind of mentioned all this, this is just how I like explain it to a candidate. I don't need as dynamic of a manager to manage inside of four walls as I do to manage a service-based business where it's going out. Because it was the same for us, right? Our manager was running the sales appointments in the beginning, managing the other employees, managing inventory, handling builders and business development. I mean, all this stuff. He's wearing all these different hats. And then, we were able to bring in another salesperson and, start delegating some of that. But like, you need a really, really solid person to come in and step into that type of a role and really succeed in it. And it's not to say you don't need talented people to manage your brick and mortar business, but it's just, to me at least, and look, admittedly, I've not owned a brick and mortar franchise, so I may be missing a lot here that I just haven't experienced, but it seems to be, to me at least, a pretty good starting point of looking at, hey, what types of options are better suited for the executive ownership model. And we could do a whole podcast on that, and maybe we should, because that's a topic that I think deserves more attention than it gets.
One piece I'd add to that, and it kind of dawned on me as you were kind of saying that, and so thanks for helping me get here. But your biggest risk in a brick and mortar is going to be your lease. You can survive a bad general manager.
Yeah.
You can't. It's your lease starting out with real estate. Yep. When you think of a service-based business, in most of my experiences, your biggest risk is that general manager.
Yes.
If that person leaves, can you step in? Could you have someone else to step up? And it's different. They both have, like you said, pros and cons. But if I had to narrow it down to like the one biggest risk on each side, not leaning one way or another, that's what I would say. But again, if the business doesn't work and service, well, you go over here, you go over there, you go another part of your territory. You can't really do that in retail. So it's definitely things to consider as people are going through, and also understanding like what is their risk tolerance, what is their level of involvement. But there's a lot of buzzwords of, oh, you can run this business, in the evenings and the weekends. And yes, people can. Very few,
Yeah,
especially if they're
it's so dependent on the skill set of the individual, and I get
yeah,
frustrated seeing, and it's not all franchises or even most franchises, and there's consultants out there pumping this type of stuff where it's like, even like positioning a franchise as like a side hustle, right? Like, you know, get into this semi-absentee side hustle business, work 2 to 3 hours. Like if you've ever owned a business, you know that no 2 weeks are exactly the same. So to even try to put these like bookends on how much time, like I've had plenty of weeks where I spent no more than 2 to 3 hours on my business. And then the next week, based on what's going on or something happened, I could spend 50 hours, like it's always kind of, so I understand why people want to get like a general sense of, okay, like what type of a time commitment am I looking at here? But there's no way to predict, with any certainty, this is a 2 to 5 hour a week commitment or 10 to 15 hour a week commitment. And so much of it depends on the franchisee and their skill set, right? As to how much time. We'll get right back to the episode in just a minute. But if you've been considering business ownership, if you're already a business owner looking to expand and you're curious about franchising, I'd love to connect with you, answer any initial questions that you have, talk about a specific franchise, and detail the exact process that I use and have taken hundreds of people through to help them understand franchise ownership, find the right franchise for them, and conduct the necessary due diligence. Click the link in the show notes if you'd like to schedule a free, no obligation strategy call. I look forward to talking with you. And now back to the episode.
I simply tell, if someone wants to keep their full-time job, I'm saying budget 20 hours. Your first 6 months, I don't care if some weeks you're spending 5, budget 20 hours every single week and know that some are going to be higher.
Yeah.
And just think about that. How am I going to make that time with my family, my other stuff? And just having those tough conversations, like that's what I'm looking for early on, is like, have they really thought through this? Or are they, just looking for what they think is the holy grail? To your point earlier, the franchisor is giving you a blueprint. They're not executing.
Yep.
The best franchise locations, to your other point earlier on territory, it's not always the best markets.
Mm-mm.
The franchisee makes the market, not necessarily the franchisor. It's the same building. It's the same wall. We acquired a bunch in the franchise I was a part of, and it was the same product. Everything was the same except the execution that was being done in the store. That's where we implemented our system.
There's a lot that falls under that execution, kind of umbrella, right? Culture. So many different things, but we've all seen examples of an underperforming franchisee gets bought out by a top performing franchisee, and in almost no time that business is turned around. Meanwhile, underperforming franchisee was telling anyone that would listen that, their market's different, or, like all the excuses that we hear. Dude, I know we're kind of coming up on time here. I'd love to have you come back. Like, let's do another round of this, because I think I think everything we talked about was super valuable and spot on, but there's like so much else I would like to get your take on. And I think this type of stuff is really, really good for prospective franchise buyers to hear from a guy that's very, very experienced in selling franchises or recruiting franchisees for brands, but you're not talking directly to them in this format, right? So you're not trying to sell them anything. You're just giving them real world experience of what people should be looking at and considering if they're thinking about buying a franchise. We both shared some mistakes that we've made in our own franchise buying experience. And I hope that's valuable for people. And I think it is. So I'd love to invite you to come back at some point. So hopefully we can make that happen. In closing, I guess my last question to you would be like, what is one of the most common mistakes that you see franchise candidates make that takes them out of the driver's seat? Because one thing I always try to coach my candidates on is like, look, it's my job to make sure that you stay in the driver's seat throughout this process so that the decision lies with you. It's certainly not my job to make decisions for you, right? You've got to do that on your own, but I can guide you and help you navigate this so that you don't get the franchisor to a point where they make the decision for you. And that decision is no thanks. We don't think you're a good fit. So what's like one of the most common areas you see someone mess this up and lose control in that way?
Yeah, I might give you a two-part response to that because it's a loaded question. It's a really good question. I think everyone should ask it.
I'm good at loaded questions.
Right. The first one is, you're buying into a franchise. You're buying into 100% of a franchise. You don't buy into 90% of a franchise. You don't buy into 50% of it. Like, just know, like, the franchisor follow their system and their process, even in the discovery process. I'm evaluating if someone keeps bucking our system and our process of, oh, no, I want to do this out of order or whatever it may be. Like, hey, like, is this person really able and willing to follow a process? Or if we have a grouped call, right? When we do grouped leadership calls where they get to meet the leadership team, if that person is cannibalizing the questions or, asking questions that are overly specific to their scenario or their background, it tells me, do they really have the empathy or do they, can they read the room well enough to be part of our franchise? So like, just follow the process and know like you're joining 100%. Doesn't mean you can't make suggestions and call audibles. And most franchises, they allow some of it, but you're signing up for a franchise. Don't sign up for 50% of a franchise or 80%, but I'm going to do everything else different. Like, follow the playbook. Like, don't try tricks until you know how to ride the bike. Like, learn how to ride the bike first before you try to start doing other things.
Yeah, I got a guy right now that thinks he's a goddamn BMX pro and he needs his training wheels still. And I just want to like reach through the computer screen and shake him. But that's solid advice. Like, franchisors look at how you conduct yourself through this as foreshadowing of how you're going to conduct yourself as a franchisee. And this is probably not a good analogy. I just think it's funny. But I actually use this with a candidate a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, how you're dating a girl and then you see her wife or her mom, and everyone says like that's what your wife's gonna look like. It's kind of like this. Like, you start acting a fool during this process, they're gonna look at you like you have an ugly mom, and they're not gonna be.
They're gonna say, "Do I really want to get married to you?"
Yeah,
yeah. No, so, I think that's a great point. And I'll give my second point, but I also think in the process, like, I always ask everyone, like, come up with your list and make sure you articulate that to team of not only your why, like why this brand, why you're going to be successful, why you're the right fit for this market, why your marketing and management style is going to work. But also, like, I jokingly tell people, I'm the world's worst closer. I am. And you might disagree if you've seen, the probably between 1,000 and 2,000 units that I've helped award for 20 plus brands, but it's come up with your why not list too. Articulate why you would not move forward. Because if you cannot do that, there's a lot of people that, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're not buyers. And I don't mean that they're not going to be decisive. They're not going to be able to make a decision. But if you quantify it and say, here's my why list, here's my why not list, your why not list does not go away. Don't expect it to disappear. It's always going to be there. Your job is to decide which one are you going to feed and which one is louder. If your why not list is louder, don't buy the franchise. That is my sales pitch. If your why list is louder, it doesn't mean the why nots go away. It just means, hey, you've got a lot of conviction. And at the end of the day, if someone comes to our confirmation day on both sides, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. If you're not dragging me across the finish line to join the franchise system, I don't want you, because you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to be gritty. You're not going to be, stuff's going to go wrong. You're going to have issues. Franchisors going to mess up. You're going to mess up. But do they have the stomach, do they have the interests and the commitment to it? So I encourage people, come up with your why not list. Why would you not buy a franchise? And if we can't get through those things, like, there's no need to go to a confirmation day or spend a ton of your time doing this, that you just may not be a buyer, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
No. And there may be another option out there that's a better fit.
Yeah, it might not be the right brand, the right time. It could be so many different things, but like, it's clear to me that if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, and that's okay. I don't ever want to make anyone feel bad. And if the franchise salespeople are pushing that, to me, they're not worried about the longevity, the success, et cetera. And it's going to be a pain in the neck for everybody else. Like, I'd rather lose sales, not sleep.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. And that last little nugget right there, for those of you listening, that is gold, right? That list your whys, but list your why nots, and then kind of weigh them against each other and be brutally honest with yourself. Can't think of a better way to wrap up a podcast than that. I know we're a couple minutes over, and you've got other stuff to do, but would love to get you back on for round 2, because I think there's just so much else that we could dive into. But I know this will be super valuable for everyone that listens. But Bobby Brennan, thank you so much, brother. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Wes. I appreciate you.